So, welcome to On the Bauble podcast, episode 2. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co host, Yuki Iyslander.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this week.
This week, we'll try and keep the episode about an hour long because last week we went almost 2 hours. I think that's a little bit too long. But today, we'll be talking about everything Iyslander and go over their general game plan, key cards, how to play against each hero, and finally the deck outline where we can tell you exactly how many blues you want, how many reds you want. And as always, we're going to start this week with this week's update and the question of the week. How'd you do this week, Yuki?
This week, mostly just been taking it easy. A lot of CC testing for Pro Tour and just like planning out some of the details for my trip to Europe. I'm actually going... I'm leaving on the 17th to go to Europe. So the Pro Tour is not until the 26th, 27th. So I'm actually going to have about like 2 weeks there in total. And most of that is beforehand. So I do have like some amount of testing that I'm going to do with some friends that are in Europe. And then some amount of like vacationing too. So there's just been like a lot of like planning and testing and stuff like that around the Pro Tour. There was a Iyslander I played Iyslander in a skirmish at a local game store. It was Blitz. And that was a lot of fun. I ended up taking down the event. I was just running Nia's list, which won Battlehard in Toronto. So that was a lot of fun. And I went to a draft armory earlier today and drafted Dromai successfully drafted Dromai for the first time. So that was good. Lots of learnings there.
Did you end up winning today?
Yeah, I did end up winning the pod. I played against Fi and then 2 Icelanders. I had a pretty crazy deck. I had like a lot of good reds, solid blues, mostly 3 blocks, lots of go agains. I had like a red rake, 2 Yender Eyes, Necria. Just really solid deck. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a good deck. For myself, I did play the same skirmish as Yuki this weekend. Unfortunately, I forgot that Crown of Seeds was banned. And on my first round, I flipped over Crown of Seeds. And my opponent pointed out to me that that card's banned in the format. Yeah, and this is why I typically only play Sealed and Limited. And I guess Construct is not good for me. So I ended up playing the whole tournament without a headpiece. And I lost almost every single game with my opponent being at 1 life and them killing me for exact lethal. So if I had like Iron Rod Helm instead, could have won most of those games, but it's what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's tough. I remember I was sitting next to Jay when that happened, and we all kind of had a good laugh because I heard Jay go, "Okay, activate Crown of Seeds," and then everyone's like, "Yep, okay," and then the opponent's like, "Wait a second." So that was a funny moment.
Okay, let's get into the question of the week. And thank you for everyone who submitted their questions on Yuki's Twitter. That was great. If you have any more questions, please put them on Yuki's Twitter or the comment section on YouTube. But our question comes from Michael Schorender.
I think it's Schroeder, but I could
Schroeder. I'm sorry I butchered your name. But his question says, how long, if applicable, do you stay open in a draft? Whether that be picking equipment or really good generics.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely set dependent. In general, for fab drafts, I would say that I usually lock into a hero often somewhere between picks like 4 through 8. In some sets like Welcome to Wraith, where there's like very strong generics, or maybe even Tales of Aria, where the elemental cards can let you stay quite flexible. I have stayed open until like very late pack 1, or even like as far as deep into pack 2. But I think it's generally hard to do in Uprising just because the heroes are kind of like so separate in the cards that they want. So usually like by the wheel, I would have locked in a deck, and often by 4th pick. I think my favorite way to stay open. There's like a handful of generics that are good. Like Brother in Arms is okay. Findles is quite solid. Quelling Slippers is reasonable. But I think more than anything, I like just drafting like whatever the strongest cards are in the pack, and maybe giving like a slight nod towards some of the strong draconic cards. Like Sasha Sandakai is just a windmill slam because it goes in like both. It goes in 2/3 of your decks, and it also is just the best in slot in those decks. So usually I'll just pick kind of like power level for the first 3-4 picks, and I kind of like to spread myself out a little bit if it's reasonable to do so. Like I have no problems starting with a generic and then like maybe like a Findle's Fighting Spirit into a Sash of Sandakai into maybe like a red Aether Ice Vein. And then I have a lot of really good options. I can play any of the classes. And if I burn the Aether Ice Vein or the Sash, it's not a big deal. And that gives me a little more time to read signals. So it kind of depends, like, the stronger, if I start seeing like really strong signals, like today I saw a Necria third pick, and I was like, okay, that's a really strong Dromai signal. Necria is like probably one of the best dragons. I already got past a Sash. Good reason to be in Dromai. So in that case, I'll probably lock into Dromai, like starting like after pick 3. I'm like pretty hard committed to Dromai unless something forces me off of it. But then other times where I'm not as sure, I might kind of dabble around until pick 5 or 6. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, I think in general, you do need to play 30 cards in your deck. So to stay open in a draft, you do need to have a point in which you commit. And that point, because your last 3 picks per pack is probably not going to be playable cards. That's about 9 cards. And if you're with your last 3 picks in each pack being bad, 9 of your 42 cards is going to be pretty bad most of the time, which gives you 33 cards to really play with. In Uprising, you do get the 3 Phoenix Flame tokens, so you really only need 28 cards roughly that's playable, which gives you about 4 or 5 dead picks you can have, which you can weave around. And that typically means you have to really commit by pick 5 in this set, where you already know that you're going to either force a hero or you're going to just have to decide basically at that point, where I'm getting past lots of Dromai cards, I'm getting past lots of 5 cards, well, Iyslander cards, whoever the hero is you think is going to be open. At that point, about pick 3, 4, 5 is when you need to be like, this is the one that's open. And if you're a little later than that, then you're going to be in the position of playing Baubles. Just obviously, it's not the end of the world to play Baubles, but it does hurt your win percentage if you the more Baubles you have to play, the worse your deck is.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you brought up the numbers there, because Uprising is different than other sets in that there's 14 playable cards per pack. So you're drafting a total of 42 cards, just like Jay said. So Uprising is a little bit tighter than the other sets. And you do have the Phoenix Flame, you do have the Helios Miter, but keep in mind, like when Jay was saying those numbers, like 9 of your picks might be dead. I usually budget for about 6, but I think 9 is like a more conservative end. But keep in mind, like on top of that, you're also wanting to draft your equipment as well, and that those are picks that you have to spend, and they're often high picks that you have to spend to get especially the quality pieces like the Sasha Sandakais and the Spellfire Cloaks. You have to spend high picks on those. So I guess like a rule of thumb that I like to use, like Jay said, I think pick 4 or 5 is usually about right. But I like to think about how many cards, if I pick a hero, how many cards in my current pool would be unplayable. So for example, if I have a generic, 2 Iyslander cards and 2 Dromai cards, I have like 3 cards for either Iyslander or Dromai, and I would be burning 2 of those picks if I decided to be one of them. So, and usually I'm happy about burning about like 3 of them. And then beyond that, it starts to get a little bit sketchy. And in that case, if I wanted to go Phi, it would actually be quite hard because I have to burn 4 of my picks. Now, Phi's a little more forgiving because he has Phoenix Flames, and maybe you could do it, but definitely hard to pivot into Phi in that spot. But you could decide on Dromai or Iyslander. But if you're at that like two burn cards already, you probably don't have many picks to play around there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I think that wraps it up for the question of the week. And one more thing I forgot to mention: if you guys have any personal questions or feedbacks, we did start a email. It is on the bauble@gmail.com. You can send your questions directly there. Any feedbacks or anything that you want to contact us for whatever reason, don't be shy. Just send us an email, and it'll be great. And we're just going to get into the main topic today. And I think the first thing that we should talk about is how many Icelanders do you expect in a draft pod? Actually, we can talk about the draft in general right here about all three of the heroes. For an 8-man pod, how do you think it should break down right now? On how many how many heroes? Sorry, how do I say this? How many
How
heroes?
many players per hero? How many players on each hero?
Oh yeah, how many players on each hero on an 8-player pod? Thank you.
I think that on average, if for Iyslander, if there's the pod can support 2 very comfortably, like the decks will be very good. When you get up to the 3rd, it will be a little bit sketchier. Dromai, I think, is similar for me. I think the 2nd Dromai is okay, and the 3rd Dromai is actually, I think, pretty bad. Like almost maybe for me, in my opinion, maybe even like a little bit worse than the 3rd. The 3rd Iyslander. I think Iyslander is like a little bit more forgiving than Dromai. And then Phi can support 3 very comfortably, and even up to 4, I think, is pretty good. If you get anything beyond 4 Phis, that's pretty poor. So I guess like on average, maybe somewhere around, I think it should be about 2 Dromai, 2 to 3 Iyslander, and 3 to 4 Phi is kind of like the ideal range. And some people's decks are going to be stronger or weaker depending on, like, if there's the 4 Phis, the Phi decks are going to be a little bit weaker. If it's 3 Icelanders, the Iyslander is going to be a little weaker. And if it's 3 Dromais, the Dromais are going to be weaker. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think that's about right. 4-2-2, 4-5, and then 2 each of the Iyslander and Dromai I think is how the meta is shaping up to be right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any input if it's like a 6-man pod? Because in these RTNs, a couple of weeks ago, when you have a odd number of players, like that, not round even 8s per pods, typically a lot of the draft pods get shafted down to 6. Even I've heard 4 or 5 player pods. Do you have any knowledge on like a 6-player pod?
Yeah, I've drafted the 6 a few times. I think that Phi tends to be like, Phi is already the most represented because he's very, like, as we mentioned in the set overview, he's very redundant in his card pool, and almost all of his cards are good. And I think that just gets amplified in the small pods. Iyslander really wants like a high blue count, and Dromai wants lots of reds with Go Again, and that just is much harder to do when you're seeing like 6 packs less worth of cards. You still get the same total number of cards, but you have fewer options to choose from. Fewer packs total are opened, and you're going to see less reds with Go Again in the pod in total. So I think that like often there will be like easily 3 Phi. I often see like 1, 2, 3, and the 1 is either Dromai or Iyslander. And if you can be the 1, it's very, very good. I have seen pods be 2, 2, 2 as well, and in those pods, I think that Phi is just like a clear favorite. If it's 2, 2, 2, the Dromai and Iyslander get a little bit spread thin at 2 in a 6-player pod, but the Phis are just like more than happy to be 2.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, then let's talk about exactly Iyslander today. We're gonna talk everything about Iyslander. What's its main game plan, Yuki?
So Iyslander is an ice wizard, and she wants to play in typical wizard fashion. She wants to play on her opponent's turn, and in particular, she wants to play blue cards on her opponent's turn because she can play them from arsenal if they're non-attack actions, as if they were instants. This also enables her waning moon, which will do 2 damage. You can pay 2 resources and pitch to do 2 damage on your turn or 3 damage on your opponent's turn, and you can only activate it if you played a non-attack. So like the level 0 of Iyslander is get a blue in Arsenal, play it, pitch for Waning Moon to Waning Moon them for 3, and then you can choose what to do with the rest of the cards. Like you'll have 3 cards left over. You probably want to Arsenal a blue so you can do the same gameplay loop, and then you have 2 more cards that you can, depending on the game state, you can block with or you can take damage and attack with on your turn. But that's kind of like the very general idea of what Iyslander's doing. And she's also, because she is ice, she's trying to discard and give frostbites. But there is more to the game plan, but that's sort of like the level 0 basic overview of it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. She's basically the only hero that gets to play at instant speed. But the downside, or the quote unquote downside, is that you can only play blues. But pretty powerful, as we see in the format. So let's start talking about the key cards in the set. What cards are you looking for when you are drafting Iyslander?
Yeah, so the number one, like the biggest cards that pull me into Iyslander are probably Spellfire Cloak, which is the chess piece, the wizard chess piece that has Arcane Barrier 1, and you can, on your opponent's turn, you can activate it to gain a resource. The cloak is just really valuable because at bare minimum, it's probably worth a life because you can use it and then quell. And if you ever get like if you have like an extra yellow in hand or something, like your resources don't quite work out because your deck's not perfect and there's some inconsistency, and you get like an extra Waning Moon out of it, it can be worth 3 damage. And 3 damage on equipment is crazy. Also, like Spellfire Cloak in the Iyslander mirror is huge because there's not very many ways to stop arcane damage. In fact, that's like the only recurring way to stop arcane damage. And if you have a Spellfire Cloak and your opponent doesn't, you're extremely favored. So I think that's like probably the highest pick for me. After that, I think Aether Ice Vein, super, super important. That's the 3 cost that at red deals 5 damage, and you can fuse it. And if you do ice fuse it, then when it deals damage, it makes the opponent discard or pay 2 resources. I think Aether Ice Vein might almost be the most important card in the deck because the tempo that you gain from making your opponent discard is really powerful, and you can set up these kind of... It's good in all pitches. Like the red is really good because it's hard to stop. The yellow is still serviceable, and then the blue can be played on their turn, which is really good. Sometimes with the blue, because it's expensive, like you might not get the Waning Moon, but the discard makes it okay. But the nice thing about Aether Ice Vein is you can often kind of get into this tempo of like Aether Ice Veining on your turn, making them discard, and then on their turn, giving them a frostbite and hitting them for more damage, and you can like really quickly close the gap. So if you have a Aether Ice Vein plus Waning Moon, that if it's a red, that's like 7 damage on your turn, plus a discard, then you frosting for 1 damage and a frostbite, and pitch to Waning Moon for 3 damage. You've now presented 11 damage before they can really do anything, and it's damage that's hard to block and taxes their resources on top of the Aether Ice Vein and on top of the frostbite. So I find that like setting up those pivot turns with that card is almost like one of the most important cards in the deck. You can play it without it, but it's very powerful.
Yeah, it looks like I think Aether Ice Vein is like probably the swingiest card in the set, where once you play it and your opponent doesn't have a way to stop all the arcane damage, you really get to take over the game.
Yeah, and I've also had opponents like pitch into Helios Miter and or like Quell and Arcane Barrier, like some combination to close it out, but that usually just takes their entire turn, and then you get to play your blue on their turn for free, and then you get to play on your turn and get an arsenal again, and they're still like way behind. So even if they block it out, it's pretty poor for them.
Yeah. I think the last card for Iyslander that's really good would be Aether Hale. This is the 1 cost Ice Wizard action. The red one deals 4 damage to any target, and the blue one does 2 damage. It's a very simple card. It just has all the keywords you're really looking for It does have the ice, so you can reveal it for the ice fusion for the Aether Ice Vein. And what's really important about this card is that it's costing 1 to do a lot of damage. Where once you pitch a blue card on your turn for the red one, you can go pitch a blue, Aether Hale for 4, then Waning Moon for 2 extra. And that only costed you 1 blue pitch and the Aether Hale. And the blue one's really insane too, because you can obviously play on your opponent's turn, and you can play Aether Hale by pitching a blue, with the 2 resources remaining. You can Waning Wound for 3 more. So the blue Aether Hale does 5 damage. The red Aether Hale does 6 damage on your turn only. And the yellow Aether Hale does 5 damage on your turn. So it just does a lot of damage, and it's very efficient on the on how all the cards are costed if most of your cards in your deck are blue.
Yeah, it really is just like the raw efficiency on Aether Hale. I used to think that this was actually the best card in the deck. I think like specifically like the blue one is really good. The red is like solid, but because you need so many blues, the blue's a higher priority. And I used to think that this was like the best card. I think the thing about this card though is that as good as it is somewhat replaceable. Like if you have a let's say that you have like a frosting instead, which does 3 damage at red, but is a 0 and it's also an Ice Wizard card, and then it goes down to 1 at blue. This is often actually this, like it looks like, oh, you're missing a damage, but for one, like missing a damage is not the hugest deal. And then when you consider that sometimes you can just get free value out of a Quell, or maybe that's like an extra resource for an Oasis Respite or a Sigil of Permafrost, like there are replacements for Aether Hale, and while it's like still a card I really value, I think because Frosting isn't that much worse than it, that's why I rate it like slightly lower than Aether Ice Vein. Aether Ice Vein though is just, it's an effect that no other card has, and so you really want to get the copies when you can, because you're never gonna, if you don't have Aether Ice Veins, there's no substitute. Whereas if you don't have Aether Hales, your deck's a little bit less efficient, and that's unfortunate, but your deck still functions.
Yeah, though I think those are a fair point. I think Aether Ice Vein is the most unreplaceable card in the deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's talk about cards you would rather not have in your deck. So essentially, cards you want to avoid. It looks good in Iyslander, but not cards you want to actively play. I think the first card that comes into mind is Polar Cap and Dampen. They're essentially the same card, at least in our eyes. You want to talk about it a little bit more, Yuki?
Yeah, so both of these are a 2-cost spell that deals 4 damage. Polar Cap can give a frostbite if it's fused, and Damping can prevent arcane damage equal to the damage dealt. But both of these hit effects are like pretty niche. Dampen's hit effect is also just not very relevant because Iyslander can usually respond to Dampen. The one exception being like the blue one. You can sometimes play the blue in response to what she's doing, but she also gets a chance to Arcane Barrier it and deny your damage prevention, so it's not great. But like in blue, these cards are okay, but like the reds and yellows are really bad, and the blues are pretty much blue 3 blocks that you can play, but you'd rather not.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. I think there's a couple other cards on the list here. Hubble Weathervane. Hubble Weathervane. That's how you pronounce this card. Okay, this is an ice action. The blue one costs 1. It says the next time you ice fuse this turn, create 2 frostbite tokens under your target hero's control with go again. But the problem with this card is that it blocks for 2, and it doesn't really have application in any of the decks, really. Like, you can play the red one or the yellow one, and it's just so hard to fuse after you play this card. It's because you do have to do it on the same turn. There's just very little spots where you can actually play this card and have any actual ability from it. So, obviously, as we keep on saying, the blue strip might be worth playing, but the ability on the card is basically blank, and it not blocking for 3 makes it almost worse than Polar Cap. But it is an ice card, so that's what you're essentially using it for, as a blue pitch that you can show your opponent with for the ice fuse.
Yeah, and you do get to like give them a frostbite and turn on your waning moon, so the blue is okay, but it's just like basically a blank card. And while you can fuse it on your turn, it's, as Jay said, it's just so hard to pull off.
Mhm. And let's talk about Read the Ripples. How good is Read the Ripples?
Uh, it's like slightly better than a Bauble. It blocks two, which is better than a Bauble, but the effect is like honestly pretty poor. Um, you just like you do get some card selection, so maybe you can get an arsenal, but it's not really like doing enough for you. The fact that you like opt one repeatedly rather than opt three makes the card a lot worse because you kind of have to just decide in the dark. And if you are getting an arsenal, like you're just probably getting a random one, and the card blocks too. So like overall, this card just kind of replaces itself poorly, and then doesn't really do anything else. So you rather just have a card that did something than read the ripples in your deck is the way I look at it.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. And then I think the last card is Brain Freeze and Cold Snap. You want to talk a little bit about those? On the notes, we said red and yellow only, right?
Yeah, so the blues are really good. A common theme with Iyslander is like blue non-attack block threes are all pretty playable. The ice two blocks are also pretty good. Like Cold Snap's really good because it replaces itself and then deals three. Because if you play it from Arsenal, you draw a card. So you're mostly looking at it for that, and then it gives them a frostbite. It turns on Waning Moon. That's great. But the reds and yellows are just so inefficient. The fact that to get the draw card, you have to arsenal it is not really what you want to be doing. And like the brain freeze discard, I found on the blue can be situationally okay in Defy. Like for the most part, I'd rather block with the card, but like the fact that you can play it in a pinch and it does something is pretty nice. But the red and yellow is just like you don't know that like for starters you have to fuse it for it to do anything, and then even if it does you don't know that you're going to be able to like meaningfully disrupt. Like it might trade one for one, but you don't know that you're going to get a good card that's going to like make their turn worse. So it's just kind of like, again, similar to the Weathervane, the floor is a blank card and the upside is like just it's okay, but it's not good enough.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Okay, next I think we're going to talk a little bit about the Majestics that either look good or is looks good but bad. Let's talk about the actual good one in this format first, which I think is Insidious Chill. How do we play with this card?
Yeah, so typically so Insidious Chill, let's talk about what it is first. It's a blue ice action. It costs three and it blocks for two. And when you play it, it comes into the play with three counters on it. And whenever you ice fuse, you remove a counter and your opponent discards or pay two resources. It's not a May, so the trigger always happens anytime you fuse. But what I found with Insidious Chill is that if you have the support for it, so if you have your kind of like, I'd say like 10 to 11 ice cards or more, and maybe like like 4 to 5 blue spells that, or sorry, 4 to 5 spells that fuse that you actively want to be casting. So not just like cards that you're hoping to pitch away or block with, but cards that you like actually wanting to play and fuse. So this could be like Aether Ice Vein. This could even be like a blue Ice Bind in your arsenal is like totally fine with Insidious Chill because you can usually fuse it for pretty low cost and then get the discard. What's so good about this card though, if you do have all of the support, is that if you see it early in the game often becomes all about Insidious Chill, and it just really lets you hold tempo and just kind of shut your opponent down for multiple turns. So I actually have played with this card, and I think that if you do get to build around it and support it properly, it's very good. But you do need all those pieces. You need the fusion, you need the ice cards to fuse with, and you need them to be spells that you want. Like you don't want to be putting a bunch of like red and yellow polar caps in your deck just to make Insidious Chill work. You want them to be cards that are good already.
Yeah, seems fair. Okay, and let's talk about Freezing Point. And what Freezing Point does is a 3 cost elemental wizard action with Ice Fusion. So it would work with Insidious Chill. And it says deal 5 damage to target hero. If it was fused, instead deal X damage, where it's X plus the number of cards. So X plus 5, the number of Frostbites, Ice Affliction, or Frozen cards they control. So how do we give them more Frostbite or Ice Affliction? Because it is a red card, right? Like you can only play it during your turn.
Yeah, so this card is not the easiest to play all of the time. Getting frostbites with this is more of a constructed thing. The easiest way to pull off, and also freeze goes away at the start of your turn, so you cannot freeze on your opponent's turn then freezing point. So really, the main way to do this is with the helmet, the glacial helm that you can pop it. Glacial horns. You can destroy it, and as an action, you can destroy it. You can freeze an arsenal and up to one ally, and it has the action has go again, so you can do another thing after it. So primarily, how I see this card is just a 5 power red spell, which I usually want a few of anyways. But it's a little bit of a premium, especially if you have the hat where it's early enough in the draft that you think you can get it, because they tend to go around. Because against Dromai, especially, this can just be 6 or 7 damage. And Dromais sometimes like to play defensively and try to fatigue you, and this can just be like a way to punch through a bunch of damage. If you can set up like this for 7 plus a Waning Moon for 2, and then on their turn maybe you have like a blue Ice Bolt and a Waning Moon for 3. That's, you've presented, what is that, 7, 9, 15 damage. So even if they have a lot of Arcane Barrier, they don't have enough resources to pitch for it. So that's kind of why I like it. But that being said, it's like relatively low pick. It's like a slightly better Ice Bolt or Succumb to Winter. Probably worse than Aether Ice Vein.
Yeah, definitely worse than Aether Ice Vein. I would probably pick Aether Hales over it still.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, and next Majestic is Frostex. How good is Frostex?
Just it's mostly a blue block 3, honestly. And while you can play it from your arsenal, it's pretty expensive. I guess what I would say is the number of turns I've had my opponent end their turn with frostbites in play is almost 0 in draft. And so I just don't think that Frostex really is relevant. But it is a blue that blocks 3, but like I would consider it basically like a titanium bauble. Not that that's in this set, but just like a blue block 3 that doesn't really have text and isn't that's kind of what this card is.
Yeah, titanium bauble will be a sweet addition to like cards you can start with. Titanium bauble is just a blue strip matte resource card that has block for 3, which is significantly better than cracked bauble. But
yeah, I believe it's from like the Dorenthia versus Reinhard set, but it's not a limited card. So
yeah, it's not a limited card at all. And last card on the list that we haven't talked about yet, Channel the Bleak Expanse. What about this card?
This card does a lot of things, most of which aren't particularly relevant in limited. I guess it does stop fuse and like some of the Phoenix Flame searching stuff. There's also like a tiny bit of card draw, but it's just so niche and narrow that this isn't really a card that I want to have in my deck. It being a blue and a non-attack that costs 1 does mean that it can turn on Waning Moon, but like realistically, I think this card is worse than Read the Ripple. Well, it gives them a frostbite. It's about on par with Read the Ripples.
Okay, close. Okay. So it's like slightly better than Ice Hale Weathervane. Weathervane.
Yeah, geez, that's really close. The Weathervane, like the blue one, you have the upside of like maybe you can pull off the dream and give them 2 extra frostbites if you have an extra card. This card just like is always blank, so it might be worse than Weathervane. It's not a good card. Don't prioritize it. If you need blues and this is the only blue, you can pick it. But I would pick like almost any other blue over this card.
Yeah, so it's close to the unplayable blue section, but it is still a blue pitch. So that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and as Iyslander, like you don't always have the luxury of the blues that you like. You don't always get to pick the blues that you play. Like sometimes you just have to play some because you want to make your blue count, and like this is a fine card for that, but it's not a card that you want. Just because it says it's a Majestic, it's not a card. It doesn't mean it's a card that you want in your deck.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I think we said it last week as well, but most of the Majestics in the set are bad and they are mostly traps. Let's try and avoid them. Look at them at their face value and try and adjust for that. The rarity really is it an indicator of how good the card is in this game.
Yeah, absolutely agree. If you come from like Magic where there's lots of bombs, Flesh and Blood is pretty much the opposite. There's occasionally bombs and sets, but especially in this set, like there really aren't too many bomby cards.
Okay, let's move into the game plan against all the other heroes. The first on our list here says game plan against Dromai. How do you want to approach Dromai matchups?
Yeah, so against Dromai, first off, let's talk about like going first or second. I actually think this is very close. For me, I think I slightly prefer going second, because you can kind of get like, yes, you let Dromai go first, and if she makes dragons or like a bunch of ash to miter, that's a pain. But at least you've gotten miter out of the way. Um, and you get to tempo her on your turn. And in particular, the more Aether Ice Veins that I have, and the more like even just like Ice Bolts that I have, the more inclined I am to go second. Because if you're just able to like present 7 arcane damage to Dromai on your like on the first like meaningful turn, you really put her in a spot of having to decide um, whether she wants to stop damage or be proactive against you. She can't really do both, and that's quite powerful. So that's kind of my inkling, but I think it's close. This is one of the closer matchups. What do you think, Jay? Do you like first or second?
Yeah, I think it doesn't really matter if you go first or second, but if I had the choice as Iyslander, if I won the die roll, I would probably go second as well. You are Dromai is one of those decks because of the Aether Ash Wings having AB1. They can. It's a real concern that they can deck you out and put you to fatigue. So each point of damage is going to matter. And when you do go first and just fire off some mediocre arcane damage, if they use Helios Miter to block it out, that's some valuable points of damage that could be useful later in the game. So yeah, I think I like going second a little bit better than going first, but as Yuki said, not that big of an edge that you gain here.
Oh, actually, one small edge that you can get against Dromai um, is that if you are going first and you've like played your spell and it looks like they want to Helios Miter more to target your Waning Moon, you can actually pass with Waning Moon activation. Like if you know, like let's say they have 3 resources. Let's say that they have like 2 resources and a card in hand, and they're probably going to have to like miter plus arcane barrier to stop the last one. You can actually wait until they miter your Waning Moon, like if they're trying to get like ash off of it, and then Waning Moon them in response rather than just giving them like the free value. So like sometimes there's like tricky plays where you can wait for them to Helios miter, then respond to the miter before the activation resolves. So look out for that on turn 1. It can be relevant.
Yeah, that's very true. So I think with the as Iyslander, what you really need to do against Dromai is to manage the Aether Ashwings and the dragons. The dragons are hard to deal with, mostly the ones with a lot of health as Iyslander, as a lot of your damage, you don't have as much damage output as if you were playing regular attacks. It counts for like just a little bit harder to stop arcane damage, but if you're a regular hero. But when you are looking at dragons, they don't block or do anything like that. But when they have 6 health, it's actually really, really difficult for Iyslander to do 6 damage to any of the dragons in general, just because like a lot of her actions only deal up to 5 damage, and Waning Moon can't target dragons. So the most important thing is to make sure that you can keep their Ashwings and dragons under control. And the best card to do that with will be Singe. You want basically as many Singes as you can get in this matchup. Red, yellow, blue, all of them is fantastic. What Singe reads is Singe deals 1 damage to any target sorry, it's 1 damage to. Sorry, I'll pull this up 1 second.
I got you. It's Singe deals 1 damage to a hero, and then 1 damage to up to 3 target allies for red, and then it's 2 allies for yellow, 1 ally for blue.
Oh, thank you, Yuki. So yeah, you want as many singes as possible, and when I say as many, you're realistically talking about 4, maybe 5 copies, but you do at least need 2 copies, or else you're going to have this problem of once they make about 3 or 4 Ashwings, they get the pitch of blue and start preventing all the arcane damage that you're presenting each turn. And if Dromai basically never attacks you and just keeps on pitching and pitching to AB3, AB4, AB5, you're going to run out of arcane damage to be able to close out the game. And a good amount of Dromai players, if they're very aware of this, will put you to fatigue.
Yeah. And for Singe, my favorite Singe is probably yellow because it kills 2 Ashwings, which is like quite a bit. Like sometimes they don't always have 3 Ashwings to kill. And the yellow can kill 2, which is like still good value, but it can also pitch and be a waning moon if you need it to be. So I like that. The blue is also main deckable, which is nice, but I I think that the blue is not as much of an anti. It's just more of like a blue that deals arcane damage because in the majority of situations when you're playing the blue Singe on on Dromai's turn, you're playing it in response to them attacking with the dragon, and you're targeting that Aether Ashwing and killing it. Before they can do anything. The best time to do this is during the layer step before the attack has resolved, because then they cannot use the silent stilettos to turn it off. So just say that you want to interact during the layer step when they've declared that they're attacking with an Aether Ashwing. But typically the blue Singe, even though it does 1 damage face and 1 damage to the Ashwing, it's not really any different than like a frosting there or an Aether Dart, because usually if you're ending their turn, they'll probably just spend their extra resources to stop the one anyways. So it's like slightly better than those, but it's not a lot better than that against Dromai.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, the yellow Singe is very important to be able to deal with multiple Ashwings at the same time and getting rid of their AB. There is a limit on how many Ashwings a Dromai player can make. That really depends on how focused they are on Rake the Embers and Mirage, Bellowing Mirage. But typically, if you can kill 8 Ashwings, you should be able to get rid of their AB through Ashwings.
Yeah.
So against exactly Dromai, other cards that are good is Scar for Scar, which is a red attack. Why is this card good, Yuki?
So the 4-power Scar for Scar kills a lot of dragons. Like the 4-power will kill a Miragai. It will kill like any of the 3-power ones, like Chromai. And importantly, because it's easy to give Scar for a Scar go again, you can even kill some of the higher toughness dragons like Uvia, which can be really hard to kill, or Necria. You can pair this up with like a 3 damage or a 2 damage spell to take out Uvia or Necria, which is really nice. And I guess the red one also takes out the Mai, which is a big problem for you. I would even go as far as to play yellow Scars. Like if it's late in the pack and there aren't really good blues for you, I will sometimes pick up a yellow Scar for a Scar, especially if I'm soft to dragons, because again, like you can take care of an Uvia with a yellow Scar and a red Ice Bind or something, and that's actually like a pretty good deal for you. So I wouldn't main deck the yellow Scar, but against Dromai specifically, I would sideboard it in.
Yeah, I think I like all those reasons. And obviously, this is almost a no-brainer, but 6-power poppers. 6-power poppers are very strong against Dromai because Dromai has the keyword Phantasm on some of her abilities, and all of her dragons have Phantasm. So when you block with a power 6 or greater attack action, any card with Phantasm will pop, And this typically is an easy way to get rid of the bigger dragons or even an Ashwing. Like, it is pretty good value to just block with a 6 power to be able to pop one of the Ashwings and get rid of it without using any of your spells.
Yeah, especially if they have like multiple Ashwings and you don't have a damaging spell in your arsenal, it can sometimes save you a lot of damage because remember, they don't get their action point back and they can't continue their turn.
Yes, and we keep on talking about how Dromai tries to fatigue you or has an easy time fatiguing Iyslander. So what you're really looking for is high damage red spells. So the 3 cost 5 damage spells is just really good at pressuring Dromai's life total when you are when each point of damage is gonna start to matter in the late game.
Yeah, there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that, like, I think at the surface, the 0 costs are a lot better. Like the Icebind for 3 and then Waning Moon for 2 is like 2 resources for 5 damage. And you look at a red Ice Bolt and it's 2 resources for 5 damage. The difference is that because it's one source, it's actually harder to stop. You force them to have higher AB. Additionally, that 5 damage, like that can kill a Necria. If you take a Necria hit, like maybe you block with 1 card, take 1, and then you Ice Bolt the Necria, yeah, you traded 3 cards for their 2 cards and they got some ash and it's not fantastic, but at least you've dealt with it. If you have only 3 for zeros, it feels really, really bad. Additionally, the other thing is what we talked about earlier, where you can go, you can set up 5 damage and Waning Moon on your turn, and then ideally high damage blue spell plus Waning Moon on their turns. If you do like a 5 and 2, and then you have like a blue Ice Bolt in Arsenal, and you go 3 and 3, that's 13 damage right there. And they're, average draw my hand pitches for 6 or 7 resources. They're probably leaking a good amount of damage, and that's one way to chip through. If you're not able to kill all the Ashwings, you can sometimes kind of just try and
go over the top.
Yeah, and it's really important that you don't just consistently do it. You set up big damage on your turn and their turn, and then kind of take an off turn to set up. Because if you just do consistent damage, it's really easy for it to block out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else to add on for the Dromai matchup?
Really minor thing, the Glacial Helm is pretty valuable in the matchup. I like using it to delay a dragon if I can't deal with it. So if there's like a Kyloria that comes down and it's really bad for me to deal with that Kyloria, I like having the option to just freeze it and then like kind of offset that and delay it for a turn. So just look for opportunities to use your Helm where it's gonna just like save you a whole extra attack from a dragon when you can't answer it.
Yeah, that sounds fair. Okay, next we're gonna talk about the Phi matchup. And let's start with, do you want to go first or second in this matchup?
I definitely want to go second. I think that Phi can just, again, like the same problem with Helios Miter stopping your damage if you go first. And the amount of, if Phi attacks you for like 14 plus damage going second, I feel like it's very hard to come back from those games sometimes, even if you have a really good Iyslander deck that's built to beat Phi. So as much as like going first and getting your arsenal might seem good, I think that the tempo against Phi, if you can go second, is really, really strong, especially if you have like some of the disruptive cards that we're going to talk about that give them frostbites or make them discard. If you can do that going second, you're really watering down their turn. Another thing you can do is you can use the helmet to freeze their arsenal, and you can use the gloves, the conduits of Frostburns, destroy them and make it so that your next spell destroys their arsenal if it deals damage, and that can be a way to reduce their hand size as well. So sometimes going second, you can kind of like slow down their momentum, and the sooner you can do that, the better. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, I think that the main point would be you don't want Phi to go second against you. If you ever have to block with 2 or 3 cards in your hand, even on the first turn of the game, it's gonna be hard to take back tempo throughout the game. So the main thing about going second against Phi would be so Phi doesn't get to go second against you. And when Fi goes first against you on their first turn, yes, they can present you like 12 damage plus, but that also just means if most of your cards do block for 3, you get to block for 11, 12, and just drop 4 cards. I think in general in draft, when we're on this topic about going first and second, uh, you don't want to leak damage if you are going on the first turn of the game. You do not want to leak damage if you're defending. So even if you have like a very good card in your hand that you want to keep, typically it's just better to block for it, like block with that card, unless it blocks for like less than 2, which almost every card blocks for 2 or 3. So most of the time you just should block with it. Save your life total, and most of the cards on Ray are very similar, so it doesn't matter which cards you're playing. Just block for 3. Don't leak the damage.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think like me, the most I would be willing to take would be 1 damage, and that would only be if it was something really important to the matchup. Like maybe if it's like a red Aether Ice Vein and I can keep that up to go second and I take 1 damage for it, I would do that. But if it's getting 2 or 3 damage, you have to block. It's just too much value.
Yeah. So the first point here, I say it says 0 cost reds. What does this mean, Yuki?
Yeah, so because Phi tends to pressure you more, he's a little bit more proactive into you because he doesn't have the option to fatigue you with lots of arcane barrier. You're usually having to block more. And because of this, I like having some 0 cost reds. So as much as we're saying the big reds are really good into Dromai, I think the 0 costs are really good into Phi because sometimes it's easy. Sometimes you can manage to keep like 1 card and do a frosting for 3 or an ice bind for 3 and then pass. And that's like an okay amount of chip damage, but keeping the big cards can be a little bit of a commitment. So I like to make sure that my deck has a few 0 cost reds just for that modularity.
Yeah, that sounds exactly the way I play Iyslander against Phi. The cards you do really want against Phi is the cards that have a lot of good disruption. So the main card that people think about with this will be Arctic Incarceration. Arctic Incarceration, red. So that card reads, create 3 Frostbite tokens under target hero's control. This card is specifically, I think, a sideboard card for Phi. It's really bad against Dromai and does very little against Iyslander. But against Phi, making them have another blue pitch to start their turn is a big deal. Because their Emberblade costs 2 resources to attack with, when you can make that card cost essentially 5 to attack with, 5 resources, it's almost never gonna happen. It requires them having 2 blue pitches in their hand to even basically start their turn. You can save a lot of life just playing 1 Arctic Incarceration. Incarceration. This card's a hard card to pronounce.
For sure. One of the nice things about Arctic Incarceration is that it costs 0. So if you are finding yourself really pressured, you can block out with your other 3 cards and then just play Arctic Incarceration, and that's like your way to claw back, or one of your ways to claw back tempo. We mentioned the red one. The yellow one that makes 2 Frostbites is also very good, and the blue one from Arsenal is just a good card because it's a blue, but especially against Phi. The 2 Frostbites is still very effective. So I think all the pitches are honestly pretty good.
Yep. And keep on talking about disruption. For the Phi matchup with Iyslander, Sigil of Permafrost is a premium. This card is it's a rare, so it's a little bit hard to get. It is a 1 cost elemental wizard defense reaction with Ice Fusion, and it reads, if Sigil of Permafrost was fused, the next time you deal arcane damage to a hero this turn, create that many Frostbite tokens under their control. What's the best way to play this card?
Yeah, so because it does cost 1 and you need to deal arcane damage, you need a blue that deals you need a blue non-attack so that you can turn on your waning moon is what you really need. So typically that means you either need a 0 cost in Arsenal, or this is going to be the card that you spend Spellfire Cloak on so that you can play like an Aether Hale for 1, then Waning Moon for 3, and have this fused as well. So you would fuse with this first, and then do that sequence, and that would cost you 4 resources. So if you have this card, I would hold on to your Spellfire Cloak to use it. Notably, it's the next thing that deals damage. So if you have a 1 damage spell in your arsenal, like a Frosting or an Icebind, you can play it, and then you can then respond to the Frosting or Icebind with your Waning Moon, and your Waning Moon will create Frostbites. And if they block out the 3 damage from the Waning Moon, well, the effect carries on. It's just the next source that deals damage. So if they block out your Waning Moon for 3, then your Icebind will then create 1 Frostbite if it hits. So this card is just always removing resources and blocking at the same time. So it's a similar effect to Arctic, but it also plays defense at the same time.
Yeah, it does create a big momentum swing against Fi that can stop Fi's turn, and you can just easily take 0 damage and then have 2 or 3 cards left over in your hand.
Yeah, I probably don't want more than maybe like 1 of this card, though. It is a little bit clunky, and the red one's the nice. You know what? Even the yellow one's good. It can pitch. It blocks 3. Like the pitch is not so important for this. Even the blue one is serviceable because it's a blue. You're more interested in the effect than the pitch. So yeah, having 1 copy is nice.
Yep, that's fair. The next card I want to talk about is strategic planning. Strategic planning blue in particular will be the best version for Iyslander to have against Fi. Okay, strategic planning blue reads it's a 1 cost generic action, and it says put an action card with cost 0 from a graveyard on the bottom of the owner's deck. At the beginning of the end phase, draw 1 card. So how do we play this card, Yuki?
The big thing about this card is that it can put Phoenix Flames on the bottom of their deck. You can do this turn 0, and it's a reasonable play, but a more common play pattern is to arsenal this, and then you can play it on their turn. It costs 1, so pitching a blue, you can still Waning Moon them. And the timing to do this, the most ideal timing to do this, is when they activate their Fi ability to pick up their Phoenix Flame. You can respond with strategic planning and bottom their Phoenix Flame. Now their ability doesn't target, so if they have multiple Phoenix Flames, you won't get them. But if they only have the 1 Phoenix Flame, then if they spent any resources on it, they actually just don't get to get that Phoenix Flame back, which is really strong. Plus the card just replaces itself, so it's like kind of like a non-ice cold snap. You draw a card not right away, but at the end of the turn. So it's just very solid. It's pretty free to play. It's a blue non-attack that you want anyways, and then it just kind of hoses Fi. If you get it early in the game and tuck their Phoenix Flame, that's just like 1 damage every turn that they're missing until they get another Phoenix Flame back.
Yeah, very powerful, very annoying card. When you don't have Phoenix Flame in the graveyard as Fi, you're losing a lot of value and damage and plays that you could be doing. Okay, the last card on our list here says Aether Ice Vein. I think we talked about this card enough, but yeah, this card is super good against Fi, where once they have to discard a card or pay 2 resources, Fi typically wants a lot of reds, so when they are a card down, it makes it harder for them to activate their Phoenix Flame ability to bring it back to their hand. Being a card down makes it harder to Emberblade. Just take back tempo a lot and save you a lot of health just hitting with this card. Even if your opponent pitches out to block all the damage, if they pitch out, their damage output becomes significantly lower to the point where we can actually deal with them.
Yeah, and one like really quick note about Aether Ice Vein, because it does require like a big commitment of fusing and a card and everything, is even if it's a red one, don't be afraid to arsenal it. I think it's very okay to arsenal this card in the Fi matchup, and then just wait for a chance where you can hold on to 2 cards, a blue and ideally a blue ice card, just to get this off, and then arsenal your ice card and get set up for the next turn, because that can be your pivot, much in the way that like Arctic Incarceration or Sigil of Permafrost can just steal tempo. Aether Ice Vein's doing the same thing.
Yep. Okay, and we will talk about the Iyslander mirror next. So same question, first or second?
So yeah, the going first or second in the Iyslander mirror is one of the most unclear to me. I think it's very close. I think I slightly favor going first just because Helios Miter is one of the few ways to stop arcane damage outside of Spellfire Cloak and maybe some qual equipment, but those are all kind of like limited. And so any resource that you have that prevents arcane damage is a huge deal because you're both dealing unblockable damage, and whoever kind of gets ahead in that race, it's very hard to catch up. And sometimes Helios Miter, like, you don't want to be pitching a ton into it, but if you can stop like one damage, even sometimes that gives you just enough life to get one extra turn cycle, which is exactly what you need. So I favor going first and getting the arsenal and being able to Waning Moon on their turn right away. But I think it's quite close, and I don't think that going second um, is terrible. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, if I think if I win the die roll, I'm gonna choose to go first. Just starting a blue card in the arsenal is just big game, and I want the maximum number of turns to Waning Moon for 3 in the mirror, and there really isn't any good ways to stop or disrupt your opponent in this mirror. So it ends up being that whoever can generate the most amount of damage first gets to win this matchup, and whoever has obviously the Spellfire Cloak. That's very important in this matchup. So make sure you have that, or you're not gonna win the race.
Yeah, so Iyslander is a little bit of a funny deck because when you play against it in the mirror, you have all these tools that are like good in Defy and really not good in the mirror. So in particular, like if you have D-Reacts like Sigil or Permafrost, you don't want to have that card in your deck. If you have like Singes for Dromai, you probably like they're okay, but they're not great. The Arctic incarcerations are really awkward because Dromai can play at instant speed and or
Iyslander.
sorry, Iyslander. Yeah, Iyslander can play at instant speed and can just respond to the frostbites and then use some of her resources to stop damage and just like not deal with the frostbites at all. So you kind of want to get those cards out of your deck, and I think there's like a number of cards to look for that you can sometimes bring in that you might get as late picks, and those are primarily cards that help mitigate damage. So the obvious one is Spellfire Cloak. That's like equipment that you always want. But what are some of the sideboard cards, Jay, that you can bring in to mitigate damage?
Yeah, so there's gonna be a bunch of generics that you would want, mainly Oasis Respite. This is gonna be true when we talk about the other heroes. This is a card you want against Iyslander all the time, where Oasis Respite can prevent damage and gain life, which is essentially the same thing as preventing the damage as well. Uh, as well as Healing Balm and Sigil of Protection. So these are all generic cards that prevent arcane damage specifically. Sigil of Protection reads Ward 4 for the red one, and it says at the beginning of your action phase, destroy Sigil of Protection. In particular, the blue one is the one that you want, as you can play this card at instant speed with Iyslander's ability. So when your opponent does play a AB damage spell on their turn, you can respond with a Sigil of Protection and essentially prevent 2 damage. And you have 2 resources left over if you pitch the blue to Waning Moon back for 3. Healing Bomb, very similar. Healing Bomb is a 0 cost generic action. The red one just reads gain 3 life. The blue one here is still pretty good, where we can play it on your opponent's turn, gain a life, and Waning Moon for 3 back, which ends up being like a pseudo D react for exactly AB. Is there any other cards?
Yeah, I guess like dampen, blue dampen is reasonable. You can play it in the same way as sigil to respond. Just remind yourself that if dampen gets like it only prevents damage equal to the damage dealt. So if your Iyslander opponent stops the damage with like say quell, that's like very high value for them, and you may not get that protection. Um, Other things worth mentioning is that red and yellow dampen and red and yellow sigil of protection are traps in the mirror. These might look like cards that you want to play um, because they stop damage. The issue is, once again, that Iyslander can just simply respond to it. if you want to play a red sigil protection, she can, Aether Hale you and Waning Moon you before it responds, and then use her remaining cards to stop your arcane damage on the crackback. Alternatively, she can also do the opposite, and you can say, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna Aether Hail that for 2, and then on my turn, I'm gonna come in with my Aether Ice Vein, and just take over the game and slow down tempo." So she can do both sides. She can pop it early when she needs to, and that's not great for you, or she can like just circumvent it entirely and ignore it. And because of her ability to just like really get around these cards, you just don't really want to be playing them.
Yeah, they can cause more harm, or you think that it's gonna prevent more damage, and then they just play around, and you're like, oh, I just wasted my whole turn.
And I guess finally, Aether Ice Vein, still a good card in this matchup. It's very hard for Iyslander to mitigate damage, play the blue from their arsenal, and arsenal a blue card. They usually can't do all 3 of those. They can usually pick 2. And if you play an Aether Ice Vein and make them only able to do 2 of those, that's like a big way to pull ahead. So try to pick these early and often, and try to prioritize playing them out, especially in the mirror, because I just feel like it's one of the biggest ways to really pull ahead in the race.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Okay, let's move on. So I want to talk about the deck outline. I think a lot of people want to know this information. For the deck outline, we're gonna generally break down of how many of each color you want to play. Yuki, if you want to answer this, how many blues, how many reds, how many yellows? What kind of numbers are you looking for while you're drafting?
Yeah, so for blues, I'd say like 14 blues is about the minimum. You can go lower, like you can run like a 12 blue deck, and it's surprisingly okay, but you'll be more inconsistent. And typically, I want to get at least 14 and up to about like 18. You can even play 20 if you can get them. It's just very hard to get 20 serviceable blues. I also usually want about like 8 to 10 reds, like good reds. And I think one thing that maybe is a bit different about how I draft Iyslander compared to others is that I actually prioritize some of those premium reds. Like I mentioned, those big red spells being important. If I'm good on my blue count, I will take an Ice Bolt over like even a reasonable blue, just because I want to have that card. So in general, of those 8 to 10 reds, I want roughly an even split between the big spells and the zeros, like the zero cost ones. So maybe like 4 and 4 of each would be pretty good. Yellows can be serviceable, and in particular, if your draft is not going well and you're low on blues, you can kind of like play more zero cost blues and then play more yellows, which pitch for Waning Moon, and it can kind of like smooth out your curve a little bit. So that's something to look out for. Another way to do this is blue Ice Bolts are actually like pretty reasonable, because even though they cost 2 and they don't fit into your curve with Waning Moon, if you have like a lot of yellows in your deck, if you pitch 1 card and do 3 arcane and a frostbite, that's actually a pretty efficient turn if you compare it to like, let's say, frosting plus Waning Moon for 4 and a frostbite. The Ice Bolt's actually pretty close. So just things to look out for. If your draft's going a little bit rough, you can prioritize those. And even in general, Ice Bolt's okay. It's a way to spend your Spellfire Cloak.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary of what kind of cards you want. And I just want to talk about cards that are like nice to have. These are things that you don't typically need in your deck. So like you're really needing 14 blues, you're really needing 8 reds. But after you get like at least close to those numbers, cards you are looking for is about 3 to 5 disruptive cards for 5, which is like Arctic Incarnation. No, I said that card wrong.
Incarceration.
Incarceration. I'm gonna butcher this card name all the time now until the end of this format. But yeah, that card. And sigil protection, you're gonna be looking for about 3 copies at a minimum, 5 on the high side. And we like a little bit higher density of these cards just because you're going to be playing more Phis in general, because in the draft pods there are going to be more Phis. Other good cards to have will be Singe. You're looking for about 2 Singes and Poppers, and this is exactly for Dromai's matchups. And you don't want too many of all of these cards, just because in the other matchups, like if you're playing against Phi, Singes are slightly worse, so you want to take them out of your deck. And same thing for Phi. If you have too many disruptive cards for Phi, you run out of cards that that you have in your sideboard that can replace these cards for the other matchups. So anything over 5 would be cutting it pretty close to making your deck unplayable. And the last card is Scar for a Scar. This card is just generally a good generic for Iyslander because you do start with less than 20 health, and that typically means that Scar for Scar has go again a lot, and any turn where you can go something like Scar for Scar, play a red 0 like Frosting for 3, and then Waning Moon. That's just a big amount of damage that's a little bit annoying to deal with, where Scar attacks for 4, then 3 Arcane, 2 Waning Moon damage, and then Arsenal of Blue is just a strong line of play you can do at almost any point in the game. So those are just all nice to have cards, where once you get a density of blues, a density of good reds, these are the cards that you should be looking at next for your sideboard options or to smooth out your deck.
Yeah, and exactly. And when drafting your deck, I would kind of take a note of how you're doing, like at the end of each pack. If your blue count is pretty good, like if you're already at like 10 blues, 12, let's say you're at like 12 blues after pack 2, you know you're in a pretty good spot and you can start to look to pick up these sideboard cards. Whereas if you're missing blues, you might need to make the discipline click and just like pick blues, even if they're really bad. You can actually play some blue attack actions as well, like Brother in Arms and Critical Strikes are okay cards for padding your blues. I'd maybe have like about 2 blue attacks maximum, like 2 to 3, ideally 2. I don't really want more than 2, but you can use those to pad out your attacks, and the ones that block well are especially good. So yeah. The one last thing I want to say about Iyslander is that I think that she is maybe the most difficult deck to pilot because you can do things on both turns and there's a lot of decision points. And in general, I think while activating Waning Moon is really important, don't be afraid to leave a blue in Arsenal if playing that card is really, really hard. Like, especially on your Aether Ice Vein turns, sometimes I just don't play the blue from my arsenal on my opponent's turn, and I just Aether Ice Vein, Fuse, and then Waning Moon, and then I have a blue ready to go on my next turn. So, like, one of the things I found hard about Iyslander when I was first learning it was that sometimes you need to just take a turn off and not play the blue, even though it seems like the thing to do. Or sometimes you need to arsenal that red card to get it ready for like a later turn. So although you usually want to arsenal a blue, look for the exceptions to that rule, I guess.
Yeah, I think those are all good points.
Any final thoughts on Iyslander, Jay, before I take us to the outro?
Yeah, I think Iyslander is a fun deck to play if you'd like control, if you'd like being the one to dictate how the game is going. Iyslander is a pretty sweet deck. It is a little bit more difficult to draft, but if you want that kind of stuff, I think you should try and give it a try. Obviously, if you're always trying to win, you don't choose what to draft, but if you're at a local armory, maybe try enforcing Iyslander. Well, might be fun. Might be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you play like other games and you like that instant speed interaction, then Iyslander is going to have a big draw to you. Yeah, one thing that is tricky about her is like in the Dromai matchup, because it can go long, you need to play very, very, very fast. So if you're wanting to play Iyslander, especially at like a big event like a Calling or a Pro Tour, it's worth getting a little bit of experience on the hero, because the lines, she's not too bad when you get used to it, but it does have a bit of a learning curve. She plays differently than all the other decks for sure. All right. Well, that concludes this week's episode of On the Bauble. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, but we'll be looking to add more platforms soon. If you have feedback about where you would like to, like what kind of platforms you'd like to see us on, email onthebauble@gmail.com and let us know where that would be, or you can tweet at me on Twitter. We are your hosts, Yuki and Jay. You can find me at Yuki Lee Bender on Twitter, and you can find my articles on redriotgames.ca. Jay is currently not on social media, but you can email him at the On the Bauble email at gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and help us be searchable on YouTube. Until next time, goodbye for now. Oh, I forgot about the sign off.
What do you want to do?
Well, good question.
Let's so like, you know, for your Pro Tour, let's talk about your first Pro Tour. Let's do that. So how did you end up on Lexi?
So for the first Pro Tour, I wanted to bring Lexi for the longest time, but I also know that I'm biased towards that hero because I really enjoy it, and I had success with her in Nats. So I was trying really hard to avoid playing Lexi, and for the longest time I said, I'm not going to be Lexi, and I thought we were on Prism for the longest time. And what ended up happening is a good friend of mine, Will Harrison, played Chain into my Prism, and he had the fatigue matchup really, really dialed. And while I didn't think it was fantastic, I thought it was better than it really was. And in reality, that matchup was quite horrendous for Prism, almost unwinnable if the Chain is well versed in the fatigue matchup. So because of that, and because we were expecting a lot of Chain, we kind of had to last minute switch back to Lexi, which was like a deck we had been kicking around, but within like the last 5 days before the Pro Tour, we decided to switch back to Lexi because of the problems that we realized that Prism had. And so that's kind of like how we wound up on the deck. And we found like a lot of tech very late into the testing cycle. There was just like 2 or 3 days before the Pro Tour, we finally found some tech for the Prism matchup, which is like was a big reason that we were holding it back. Like we liked the Starvo matchup, we liked the Chain matchup, but the Prism matchup was a problem. And we actually finally cracked the code with the right mix of just like lightning attacks that let you go wide and pressure, lightning press that lets you kind of just like threaten the footsteps and go over the top. And then just like not setting up as much so that you don't play into their Arclight Sentinel and just like getting hosed by their Arclight Sentinel when you try and set up your 6-card hand. So just like that difference of playstyle and sideboard really made a difference in that matchup.
Yeah, it ended up being the stock Lexi list for like the next little while that everyone played is like just your Pro Tour list.
Yeah, it was really cool to kind of stumble across that. It was actually fairly early in the testing cycle that we found the Art of War Rain Razor plus Ice combination that we thought was like really, really powerful and had potential. But the Prism matchup really was what was holding it back until we cracked the code on that at the very 2 days before the Pro Tour or something. I know some of my testing partners were not thrilled with me like being like, nope, we're going back to Lexi, or like, I'm going back to Lexi. They're like, oh wait, what do you mean? Like, we don't even have the deck list finalized. It's 4 days before. I don't have wraps. And I went, well, too bad.
Yeah, like Eric Lehrer from the Spark of Genius podcast. Yeah. He ended up playing the exact same list, and he did well too, right? He went top 64 or something. He day 2'd for sure.
He day 2'd he did okay going into day 2. He had a feature match on camera in day 1 that was rough. It was a Starvo control that caught him by surprise, but he did make day 2, and so that was awesome. And then our other testing partner, Nia, who won Battlehard in Toronto on Iyslander, was also on Lexi, and he wasn't qualified for the Pro Tour, but he was playing in the calling there, and he day 2'd I think he was one win short of cashing the calling. So all three of us day-two'd, and yeah, we were pretty happy with how the deck performed.
Yeah. I was talking with Yuki, just like I wasn't part of the testing group or anything about like that for the Pro Tour there, but all I remember was talking with her, and we're just like, she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna play Prism. I'm gonna play Prism. I'm gonna play Prism. I'm gonna play Prism." And then like a day before the Pro Tour, she's just like, "Oh yeah, I'm on Lexi," and we're just like, "What? What happened?" Like, oh my god, that was a pretty fun. That was a pretty funny moment.
Yeah, it was a bit of a wild ride. It's not where I expected to be, and I'm hoping that this Pro Tour will be a little bit cleaner, but
Yeah.
who knows? It's still a month away, and right when I thought I had it figured out, there was a ban announcement. So, back to the drawing board. There's a lot more options on the table again when Fi isn't killing everybody in 2 turns.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I think that can conclude the episode. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for watching.